Danielle.
Welcome to the Femsplainers. I'm Christina Hoff-Summers.
And I'm Danielle Christina, and we are coming to you from excellent studios in beautiful downtown Hollywood. We are on location. We've made it, Christina.
Yeah, we're near Hollywood and Vine.
We're near Hollywood and Vine. We're in a studio that when we came in, we were a little nervous till this nice man named Danny met us, but the whole hallways smelled of a certain substance. There's a lot of spray paint.
A lot
of graffiti. And we thought maybe we just entered an episode of Blade Runner. But in fact, there's this lovely studio inside, and this is where we are. And we're here.
You're making this sound like it's our proof of life video. Like we're just...
We're here. The voice you hear is Caitlin Flanagan, who, of course, lives in L.A. and is really one of our all-time favorite femsplainers. We are honored to have you in excellent studios.
I'm
Welcome.
Very honored to be here. Thank you.
Normally we, obviously come prepared with questions, but yesterday I emailed you and you said, Caitlin, let me just know if there's anything you want to talk about. And you sent back such a thorough selection of topics. I think we just go to those.
We should do that with all guests and just save ourselves a lot of work.
Yeah, that's true. You've really made life easy for us here.
Excellent.
But you had, and there's just also the other thing about Caitlin, who I should mention is obviously a contributor to The Atlantic. I mean, you just write about we could literally sit here and talk about everything under the sun for the next hour, but I'll just go through your points and then anything else we want to come up with.
Okay, good.
So one of the things that you said is I'm interested in the predictable blowback I got from the left for writing about Ilhan Omar. So I read that piece. So do you want to describe what happened to you? It was a very interesting, subtle take on what had happened in this meeting.
Well, there'd been this moment in Washington at a conference for Muslim Americans where someone got up in the audience and asked Ilhan Omar if she would be willing to make a pledge at that sort of event that she would stand against FGM,
which is
female genital mutilation. And Ilhan Omar had a response that was very stirring and that got great sort of applause from the room. And it was, in one respect, a very good answer, sort of saying, why is this the litmus test for me because I am a Muslim American? Why am I constantly having to say I'm against FGM? You don't ask that of any other Congress people whom you happen to, run across at conferences and so forth. And why is not my American identity the first identity that you engage with? Why are you standing here and engaging with my Muslim identity? And so people were applauding in the sense that it clearly was the feeling in the room of experience that it was some kind of litmus test that Muslim Americans are constantly having to pass, or maybe Muslim Americans from certain parts of the world. And
or with certain constituencies at home
that
aren't they? 90%
doesn't she represent
Somalian?
A constituency?
Well, this is exactly the issue for me, is that in the first place, the woman who was asking the question, so Ilhan blasted the woman. She just blasted her and said, I'm appalled you would ask this. I'm disgusted you would ask this. Why would you do this to me? Well, the woman herself, Ani Zonneveld, who lives out here, is the founder of Muslims for Progressive Values. She's a very outstanding human rights advocate, an advocate for girls, and says no matter what kind of stigma there is, we always have to put the human rights of girls ahead of anything that we might have to deal with. But the other issue was that Ilhan Omar was saying, I've made statement after statement, I voted for bills, and what more can I do? So it was an interesting comment. The one hand, she did vote for a bill to criminalize FGM committed by parents in Minnesota, when she was a state legislator. But she came out strong with a lot of opposition to the bill. She didn't want parents to be punished. She didn't want them to be punished so severely if they had to be punished. She didn't want daughters being removed from the homes.
Well, I think some of the punishments that were cited is like you would be treated like child services or abuse, that if you did this to your daughter, you could risk losing your child.
Exactly. But I have done foster care legal work out here, and I'll tell you right now, and I checked in Minnesota, nobody charges those things out as inflicted trauma, child abuse. Everybody recognizes that it's a cultural thing. It exists within a complex framework of ideas in families, and that you're typically not looking at a family that is an abusive family in any other kind of way. So that whole idea that that would solve the problem isn't right. But you really got the idea that, you know, Ilhan Omar, she represents, I had thought she just represented that really large Somali diaspora, which is right there in Minneapolis, kind of near the Mall of America. But she represents the whole city, which Minneapolis people tell me that's not, she's going to get primaried. They are sick of her. It's because she's going out into the suburbs and everywhere. It's a big district. It's the 5th district in Minnesota. And anyways, the bill ultimately failed at the state level. It didn't pass. That was going to criminalize parents having FGM performed on their children, their daughters, because groups from that diaspora stood up against it. Minnesotans of African heritage, Isroon is another group. And the state decided in so many words that their response to FGM was that they were going to, quote unquote, leave it to the community to solve the problem.
Oh, wow.
So, number one, if there's anybody from that community that has power, it's Ilhan Omar, who, you know, was born in Somalia, lived there till she was 9, then was in a Kenyan refugee camp raised by a father and a grandfather, and then, of course, came to the United States. So if there's anyone from that community who could speak out against it, it would be she. The State Department, interestingly enough, gave a large financial grant to the Minneapolis area to work on FGM, and I am the sort of person who will sit at home and take the entire program that our State Department has created, and I found very little even about FGM, and I found a pledge in there that parents who choose to go through this program, it's totally optional, that our State Department wants these parents to make this pledge that they will, quote unquote, not let their son marry a girl who has had FGM. Our State Department's sending that out. Like, that's just a training material that I'm sure no one ever sees because I'm sure no one ever uses it.
Also, put the onus on the man, not the parents to not do this.
Right, because they were being culturally sensitive to the most patriarchal culture on the face of the earth.
Well, it's also like, let's shun those girls to whom we have done this.
Exactly, exactly. And so the whole thing with FGM, the reason that that progressives are they've been right for a long time to stand up, because we didn't know against this sort of search for FGM and concern about it, because for a long time we really didn't know whether or not these girls that were in these communities that started coming into the States in the 90s and that are so heavily located there in Minneapolis, we didn't know, were their parents bringing that cultural tradition with them? It stood to reason they probably were. In Somalia, 98% of women and girls have had this performed on them. It seemed to reason that they would. It didn't seem like something that the state didn't know. They really no way to intervene. We couldn't say, well, you're Americans, but we get to examine your daughters with pelvic exams every year, obviously. So it was a really difficult area where a lot of progressives, typically white progressives, were starting to say, this is a witch hunt. There's not a lot of evidence this is going on. And then, of course, a year and a half ago or 2 years ago, 2 little girls from Minneapolis, the FBI was involved, were brought out of state they were from the Somali diaspora, a different religious sect of it, but to Michigan. And the FBI, where they had FGM performed on them, both of them age 7 years old. And the FBI determined that there had possibly been up to 100 girls taken to that clinic over a 12-year period. And they had a really airtight case. And then the only law we had as Americans to protect all girls against it was a federal law, which was just found out to be thrown out of court, not a constitutional law, that this is a state's issue, that's not a federal law. So the woman who performed those 100 minimum FGMs on little girls of age 7, she's free and clear, as is the clinic owner. And so it was the harbinger of the fact that, you know what? Looks like this really is going on to some extent. We don't know how much. It's a very closed community. But the fact is, these are American girls. These are our girls. These girls are absolutely have the same rights and protections as Americans. These are children who have come to the West, and the great protections of the West. We've planted our flag in civilization at every single opportunity. You could go from Frederick Douglass, Mary Wollstonecraft. I mean, you can just go all the way through that we have planted our flag on the side of civilization, and this is not what we do to people. This is America. We don't do that here.
Well, where are the women's groups? You would think that this would be a pressing, women's rights issue.
Interesting fact, because this is where it's this ridiculous clash of intersectional, point systems where you have the progressives saying, obviously, on the one hand, girls, women, rights, etc. On the other hand, here's a culture that must be protected, the culture of Somalia and the culture that people participate in. And we must not, they don't say we must not interfere with that particular cultural practice, but we must not assume that it's going on. There's tremendous tension. And they want people from within the community to solve that problem. But it's a community that seems to hold that as a high value. And Ilhan Omar, at every point, she does exactly what the Provisional Constitution of Somalia itself does. She speaks very strongly against female genital mutilation and does nothing of substance about it.
Well, there's another Somalian woman who was subject to female genital mutilation and then raised
grandmother's table, I believe.
Yes, and then the family fled to Kenya. The very similar story, which is Ayaan Hirsi Ali. And she has taken a very different approach. She has founded an organization, the AHA Foundation. I guess that's Ayaan Hirsi Ali Foundation.
Yeah, no exclamation
mark. To protect young women from the imposition of such practices and other, manifestations of Sharia law in the United States. And she does, her organization does training for police forces about honor killings, because there are young women in the United States subject to honor killings, as well as FGM. And yet, somehow, the women's organizations
won't touch it.
Side with
the most patriarchal cultures on the face of the earth.
You could say, well, we have to respect the culture. Well, why not respect the dissidents within that culture who are fighting for women's emancipation? And that would be Ayaan and her group. But that's not what's happening.
And that there are some cultural traditions that we don't support. You can't do here. Mm-hmm. That's it. That's not... I mean, it's a very, very, very complex issue, because right away you get into male infant circumcision and you get into all the whole human rights around the cutting of children's genitals. But of course, and I knew that there would be a strong blowback of people and her office trying to get me to back down on it, which of course I wouldn't do, because these girls seem to be in really serious peril of having their vaginas cut in a very, permanently altering way.
Now, what kind of pushback did you receive? They sent emails to
your
provost?
To your provost? Well, her office called. Well, this was, I sort of learned about how Washington really works, in a sense, in that... So you've got Ilhan Omar. She's out there doing her own thing. Like, she's a big, important national celebrity. She's really interesting. She's really authentic to her own vision of things. So she's out there and noisy. Then I'm over here in the journalism world. I'm a micro celebrity, but I'm big and noisy in my world. But then behind both of us, you have these really smart men at our different institutions. So my guy at the Atlantic was sort of talking to her guy in her office, sort of about my piece and about tweets that I had sent out about the piece. And I think their office would have liked me to not continue to tweet about it in certain ways, but I wouldn't capitulate to that. And then Ilhan Omar, fortunately for me, has gone on to have an affair with somebody, so she has all sorts of other issues.
She denies it. She denies it, but yes.
Oh, hasn't she just said? Or she's just not going to talk about it.
Yeah,
Much like FGM. Don't ask me. Okay.
Yeah.
But I think she's an evil person. I really do. I think she's a very evil person. I think her anti-Semitism is to the bone. I think anti-Semitism is, I would say, is up there. I mean, it's the original human sin. It's like it just keeps reemerging all over the world, century upon century.
And it seems to be compatible with every, form of extremism. It turns up,
it doesn't matter it doesn't matter what the politics. Okay, so you got blowback for that, but then in like this same week, you got blowback for a piece you didn't even write.
I know. That's when you know you're winning.
That's when you know
when
you're
the
doing your
canceling
job.
is going on. You don't even have to do anything, and the canceling.
Yeah, you're going to be brought up on the carpet of the Atlantic.
Oh, well, just the general cultural canceling, I await it. Eagerly.
We're going to have Emily Yoffe to talk about this on the program in a couple weeks, to talk about this incredible article she wrote for Reason, which we Christina and I have discussed.
About some unfounded accusations that destroyed
the canceling of
destroyed a journalist for bad behavior on dates.
So yeah, that's its whole thing. You were then, and you've been outspoken, and you've come on when you wrote your piece about Aziz Ansari, thank you. When you wrote your piece about Aziz Ansari, you came on and we were talking about almost like the right to a good date, that when a date doesn't go exactly the way a woman wants, she can come out and now say that this was some form of assault or oppression or whatever.
Well, I think that we made a category and then we lost a category. So when we were young, when I was in college, when someone did, a young man when I was 17 years old, really tried to force sex on me, and I had no one had taught me that this was something that could happen on a date. I didn't know it, and I entered a period of extreme shame. It was a terrible event for me. And it was a few years later when I was in college in the 80s that I heard the term date rape. Never heard those two words together before. I just thought I knew what a rape was and I knew what a date was, and I had completely taken into my sense of self that I wasn't someone anybody would want to date. I was just someone you'd take out to the beach and try to force sex on and then dump off back at the house when she, really fought you off. So we created this important new category. It was really an exhilarating time that just because you said, yeah, I'll go on a date, yeah, I'll go out to the beach with you, that didn't mean that anything he did, sounds so primitive to even think we used to think that, but that didn't mean that anything he did there to you was okay and was your fault because you had been taking the risk to go on the date. But so that category has gotten wider and wider and wider in terms of things that are decided happened in an intimate context that maybe seem consensual but are going to be determined as assaults of some kind. That category is getting huge. But we've lost, and I think this moment when I was on NPR about this incident we're going to talk about, that was when I realized we have lost almost entirely another category called a sexual encounter that you have that afterwards you're like, ugh, I sure wish I hadn't done that. I feel horrible. I wish I'd spoken up for myself. I'm embarrassed. Any sense that I as a woman... And that I had hopes. I had hopes that it would be more romantic. I had hopes that it would be the beginning of something. I had hopes that afterwards, by the time I got home, there would be 3 texts on my phone.
And flowers.
Yes, and just a sense that...
Or maybe you just thought, God, I wish I didn't drink quite so much because I wouldn't have done that.
Right.
He's
and there's
not
part
the
of
guy
my
I
mind
would've-
that tells me I was empowered to do it, and so I'm leaning into that.
Right.
But there's...
I didn't even expect anything. I don't want to see him again myself, or I don't want to have a relationship with him, but I really wish I had not done that.
Right. So what the very stigmatized term, which was once was a bad term, but the idea that sex could be regretted. There used to be a category for that. Like, I wish I hadn't done it with that guy that way. I regret it. I'm embarrassed. I don't even want to see him again. That category, I think, is totally closed now. I think there are no
more like bad dates.
There's no more.
You have to place the blame, and the blame is always on the man because I guess we have no agency. So whatever happens is someone else's fault.
Well, then that's infantilizing, right? Like, to women, it takes back the whole... I mean,
Takes
even the
away
whole
agency.
70s sexual liberation proved a little problematic for women in many ways, and we've discussed this. But it at least acknowledged that women have sexual appetites, they should not be stigmatized for their passions, and that it was almost a kind of exuberant embrace of
liberation. Women could be as wild as, and we had all these bad boys. Well, we could be bad girls, but it was understood. And now suddenly they're only sort of in any regretted sexual encounter, there's a predator and a victim, and typically the male. And that's very strange that we've...
Caitlin then goes on to talk... You didn't even go on to talk about Emily Yoffe's article, but you were paired with a writer at Vox Anna North, I think, who had criticized Emily. And so on this NPR program, which I listened to, they brought you on to talk about this phenomenon in general and consent and the murky waters we're in. And this woman, Anna, and then she started going after you.
Well, the victim, whose name is Felicia, she's at the Washington Post. So anyways,
the victim of this.
Yeah.
This
so here's what happened.
case.
I'm at home and I get an email from NPR. Do you want to go on NPR? Do you want to go on All Things Considered tomorrow? And you can do it from home on your phone. And I'm like, fantastic. It was obviously that you could tell I was a replacement for someone because it was so last minute. And I'm
That's
like,
always
sure.
flattering.
Exactly. But it's like, I'm at home and I can do it from my cell phone, of course. And it was Michelle Martin was the host, who's just brilliant. So the whole email says, do you want to come on and talk about where Me Too is now and Aziz Ansari and how men can make apologies, whatever. So I'm like, oh, sure. So I'm thinking, no, maybe it's about the way Aziz has been making an apology on his latest tour. That's what I think it's about. Yeah. So I'm on my couch. We start the conversation. Then I talk about Aziz. I talk about Aziz. Then the woman from Vox comes on, and I hear that she's really talking about this article that Emily Yoffe, whom we all know well and admire very much, that she's talking about this article that Emily wrote, that's a 9,000-word article in Reason, which has to do with this young woman, Felicia Sanmez, who was a Washington Post China correspondent in Beijing and who claimed that a drunken scenario between her and an LA Times reporter was non-consensual. And so I'm kind of listening to that. I don't know about it yet. I've bookmarked the article. I saw that she had a big Reason article out, and I always read what Emily writes, but I hadn't read it yet. So I'm not saying anything about that case, Felicia Sanmez or China or all these complicated issues. But at the end, I'm asked as a summation question, what do you think about all these things? The subject. And so I just give kind of a little peroration about, I think when two people are out and they're drunk and they do this and there may be regret or whatever. So Felicia Sanmez just becomes like Hellcat of all Hellcats and decides in this way that revealed what might seem, I'll use some good fact-checky words, what might seem to some to be an act of profound paranoia, vengeance, and attempt to bring discredit to the veracity of her stupid claim. She starts emailing me that I need to apologize, that NPR needs, that I've said this thing about her, and that she's tweeting it rather, that, I have made these false claims about her and she wasn't this and she wasn't that. And when you said that, it wasn't like you hurt my feelings. It was like, it was so wrong. So I'm tweeting to her. I'm like, boy, she's a live wire. Let me just try to calm this down.
You tried to calm her down. There was no calming her down.
Because at first I thought maybe this is just a legitimate mistake. And I'm like, I wasn't asked to come on to discuss your situation. I wasn't talking about you. I was making a general comment.
It's not all about you.
And then she put me in this prisoner's dilemma where I had to either cop to being really badly prepared for an NPR segment that's like
you
9
did
minutes.
admit on the air that you hadn't not read that article,
Yeah.
which is fair.
Right.
You weren't expected to,
And then, so I either had to admit that I was really behind and was not a good NPR guest, which who is she to judge? Yeah. And then, or I had to admit that of course I had read it, and instead of out front, confronting her, I was making this sly thing. And then she starts papering NPR and papering all these people that I should be forced to apologize. And
Did she paper your boss? Did she call the provost, as it were?
No comment. And so it was obvious. And so then people start saying, I wouldn't really get Caitlin Flanagan mad, but I'm still I am going to be a good camper. I am not going to be, flame warring. And then she says something else, and I said, look, if I'm not your enemy. Trust me, if I were, you'd know it. I'm not, I am not known for not talking.
Did you threaten her, Caitlin?
I did not threaten her. I simply stated this. And then something that I will never get credit for, certainly from her, but which I'm going to fully acknowledge is a problem of a sort that I ended up protecting her from. So, the world's smallest violin for my getting any nice words about that. I ended up deciding to really let her have it. And I said,
I have the tweet. Can
okay,
I read it?
Please.
Felicia, the person you're really angry at lost his job.
his book contract. He's had suicidal episodes and no health insurance. He feels hopeless and he's living with his parents. What more do you want from him? You won.
Yeah, that was kind of drop the mic moment. So
then
her response?
So I start getting, then she kind of went quiet, I think, at that point. But then I start getting it, the Twitter, sometimes people hate it. I'm very interested by it, but it starts getting very liked. And then I start going through the likes and the comments, and I'm like, oh, this is exactly the last person. Within this group of people saying, you are so sensible and right about this, Caitlin, you're also seeing groups of people that seem to be probably men who are unleashing what are, to me, unacceptable ways of...
Right.
So then I end up taking that one down, but then she still comes back at me. So it's just this idea that, what happened? What happened that... How could this possibly have happened to our culture that we got to a place where women could be so free that they could have big reporting jobs overseas, speaking in Chinese and reporting about human rights violations and all of that? There's true parity, and that the expat club of journalists was no longer the old boys club, that it was a place where women could pick up somebody and get laid just as much as men could, and where a woman could be riding a motorcycle in Beijing and bringing a guy home. It's like, oh, that all sounds really great. And then during a makeout session, he touches your vagina in a way that you are now deciding was not consensual, but you went up to his apartment anyways to have sex, but within that sex was something that was not consensual. That's just absurd. And I think it's, again, to use Eric Weinstein's phrase, it's the intellectual Truman Show. We all know that's not accurate. That just cannot be something that is really a problem in our society. But we all have to either live out here on the darkling plane of post-cancellation, which is really great over here. And if anybody wants to get canceled and come with us, we love it in Cancel Land. But, you either have to come to Cancel Land and be at Hollywood and Vine. It's not bad over here. Or you have to just say, yes, this was a terrible event and the trauma must be without end.
Well, it's more also to the point where you're talking about, look at the reaction you're getting from this person that you weren't even talking about.
Yeah.
And the sort of hysteria and anger. So you see, so that sort of makes you have retro, sympathy for maybe her 5 year later, or whatever it was, accusation against the reporter. But it also goes to the point, and this is really at the heart, and probably what we're all debating now, which is, believe the woman, believe the woman, believe the woman. That it's whatever she says goes and is true. The man is not allowed any say. They were not interested in hearing from him. And the bosses are going along with it. I mean, this is the other thing. And you've written about human resources, too, the July issue of The Atlantic. And that was fascinating because you went to a HR convention last year and in Texas, I think. And it was a whole convention of HR people, and your observation was, well, if HR people were doing their job, how did all this Me Too stuff happen? And that's another good conversation. But we're also looking at employers who are also not willing to give their employees any kind of fair hearing. They're just gone.
I'm just thinking how aggressive she was with you and irrational and punitive. You had very little to lose. Who cares what she thinks about you? But imagine being a man, and the young man described these long conversations where he was sort of desperate for her not to make a federal case out of it, and she seemed to be going along with him, and then she had to be very vengeful and punitive.
Oh yeah, she recorded him and
recorded him, and I mean, she's a frightening person. She's a frightening person. And she's sort of not just her, but there's this kind of weaponization of alleged female vulnerability, and they're not vulnerable; they're empowered. She's had the power to destroy someone.
But we could go back and look at Fatal Attraction.
I was just thinking, the line
Glenn Close was a victim.
The line in Fatal Attraction that explains all of this is, I'm not going to be ignored, Michael.
I'm not going to be
I think
ignored.
a lot of these events are the young woman, I want to be back in contact with him in some way.
I think she was angry that it turned out he had a girlfriend.
That's what it's all about.
So is he guilty of being a cad?
That's what it's all about.
Maybe.
He had a girlfriend.
Yes,
That's what it's all
Who
about.
is stuck by him? But let's actually let's go into human resources, because that was
so boring.
No, okay, just the one question. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you're right. Everybody rolls their eyes at human resources.
Yeah. It's all women, by the way. If things are so terrible in companies, right. It's something like 90% women are in HR.
76,
So are they the ones that are sitting there allowing women to be paid, 86 cents for every dollar?
Right.
Man?
But as you said, and I'm just quoting from your article, you said, if HR is such a vital component of American business, its tentacles reaching deeply into many spheres of employees' work lives, how did it miss the kind of sexual harassment at the center of the Me Too movement? And given that it did, why are companies still putting so much faith in HR? That was a good question. And clearly it's still going on. What do you do about it? How do you explain this?
There must be some sort of business term. I'm not a business reporter or a business person, but HR is hideously over-responsive to weird, marginal, small claims made against minor male players in a company who will just get dusted right out of there for a claim.
For an overheard joke.
Exactly.
Or benevolent sexism or something.
But if you are a very powerful man at the company, like you sustain 25 other jobs, you bring in a lot of business, you're a valuable player, it's going to be pulled out of HR's hands immediately because the company knows it's a much bigger deal than that and they don't want to be stuck with HR. And they'll usually find something that can be a reasonable solution. Like it can be like some mind-altering counseling, like, we will bring in a lawyer and destroy you if you do this again. You can keep this job, but we will we will destroy you if there's another case like this. Those are the kind of conversations that go on because it's a huge liability for companies. So what ends up happening is you have the powerful guys getting a reasonable or totally unreasonable deal one way or the other, and the low power guys getting losing their jobs because they tucked their shirt into their pants in front of a woman.
Right. Well, you actually, the way you sort of came to the conclusion at the end of this, which I thought was interesting, that in the end, the HR people are not working for you, the employee, you, the woman. They're like the guards at the camp, protecting the higher ups, as you say, against expensive lawsuits. And if anything was to be done about it, you would have to start at the top. But
what they're really doing is reverse engineering employment law into touchy-feely principles and concepts that you can sign off on. So that's why HR people, even if they're not, they will come across as being extremely progressive. Like if you talk to them now, they're just all about trans rights and trans, policies in the health insurance. And it's not because they are, God love them, activists in terms of trans rights or anything like that. It's because the latest, conference and latest memo from the Society of Human Resources managers is that these are big lawsuits coming in, that trans people weren't feeling comfortable somewhere, or that trans surgeries weren't covered. So it's just reverse engineering sometimes quite obscure employment law out of Washington into what looks like a fair policy. And you think they must be really nice people because they want to get the trans people the hormones that they need. But no, they don't really care about that either. This is all just a bloodless, straight-ahead business transaction that looks friendly, and they have discounted tickets to Knott's Berry Farm, so you think they're on your side, but they're not on your side.
Say Chipotle Friday, everybody.
Exactly.
But I once got in trouble, serious trouble with HR. I won't say where, because there was just a routine fire alarm, practice alarm, and I stayed in my office and shut the door, and I thought no one will find me. And he found me, and I got a reprimand.
You got a reprimand, but
gotta say, Christina, you should have been outside.
I know.
There's fire
He was
people.
really indignant, and I thought, what the hell?
You're showing you're not being a good team player.
Yes.
What you're showing. I once didn't lodge a complaint, but I was having trouble, and I won't say where, but a few years ago. And I realized I was being treated differently by this male executive than my peers, male peers. And that there was a real bullying aspect. And finally, I just got sick of it, and I said something to him. and he got HR in on it. And you, as you know me, I would never lightly play that card, but I just got fed up.
Right.
And I said, I think you're doing this because, and the HR was a woman, and she was horrified that this was going on, did nothing, and eventually I left. But it's you realize that nobody likes whistleblowers in corporations, as it were, and you as a woman complaining about, you can complain about somebody who's not high up, but try question an executive.
That's
and they
the
have
whole
so much
problem.
invested in that person that, and then it becomes almost you against them. Who do they value more?
That's a complication that I don't think the Me Too is acknowledged, is that, so what we have in corporations is you still do have an old boy network and protections, but who's the most vulnerable? Just any hapless young man. They are expendable.
But so are the young women who get harassed. Like, they can't, that's what I'm saying. Even as a woman, you think you've got this powerful...
Well, they might be a little afraid. I think companies are increasingly afraid of those young women because they can make trouble, or they can...
Maybe now.
Start... Yeah, I think that's changed. But at the expense of... There's always someone who's just going to be expendable. You get rid of them, throw them away, like James Damore.
Let's take a break there for just a second so we can go to one of our sponsors. Christina, I'm actually now getting genuinely worried about you. And as one of your best friends, I think I have to stage an intervention. You are stressed out all the time. You're not sleeping.
No, it's because of Twitter. It's because of the politics. Everything distresses me. But I have my Cure Royales. What are you talking about?
Christina, as much as we love cocktails on this podcast, drinking is not the answer. You know what the answer is? BetterHelp. BetterHelp is online counseling. You do not have to leave your house.
They come to your house?
No, they come. They come onto your computer, onto your phone. What they are, I mean, you might be feeling stressed. You might be having problems sleeping. You might be dealing with trauma. You might be dealing with anxiety or family conflicts
or Twitter
meltdowns. And actually, BetterHelp will not only help you find your professional counselor in a safe and private online environment, it's super convenient. They will connect you to 3,000 licensed therapists across all 50 states, with services also available worldwide. And you can do it by text, you can chat, you can do it by phone, you can do it by video, and you can start communicating in under 24 hours.
You know, that's interesting, because if you can do it from home and you can do it online, what a great idea.
Right. And it's like you don't even have to get off your couch. your couch.
And I don't have to leave my house because I'm not about to.
And maybe you want to talk to somebody about agoraphobia.
Oh, at my age, what's the point?
But maybe the best thing of all about BetterHelp is it's a truly affordable option. There is financial aid available if you need it. And Femsplainer podcast listeners can get 10% off your first month with discount code Femsplain. That's go to betterhelp.com/Femsplain and you'll get 10% off your first month of therapy. So why not get started today, Christina?
Here's just a story, like out here in LA, I taught school for a long time at Harvard Westlake School. Originally it was Harvard School, so this is back in the 80s. And it was just, I look back at it in light of all of this, and I'm like, this is really interesting. There's no HR, believe me, nothing like it. And I'm a young woman teaching with other young women. And then that year they had a lot of young men come into the department. It's the English department. And one of them was just kind of not a fit, I'll put it that way. And I'm 25 and my girlfriends are like 25 and a couple are in their 30s. And he was super popular with the students. It was an all boys school. And so he puts like a pinup picture over his wall, over his desk in our shared office. Like the girl was in a bikini, but it was like a very sexy, thongy bikini picture.
Is it the Farrah Fawcett poster?
No, it wasn't that long ago. I would have had to countenance Farrah. I mean, she would be grandfathered into any. But I was just like, this is like really gross because we're the English department. We're Chaucer. We're Shakespeare, and I did sort of feel, and I was, I'm a feminist. I was like, I shouldn't have to come into this office to work when all these horny young boys, understandably, are running in and giggling and looking at this wank shot. So I decide I don't want to talk to my boss, whom I adored because he was a man. It was all kind of uncomfortable. My department chair, whom I absolutely adore. So I go to this woman who's the head of the upper school. And I say, this is going on. She goes, oh, yeah, that's not good. And I said, so can you talk to him? She said, absolutely not, Caitlin. You're a strong woman. You go talk to him. Yeah. And at first I was like, but then I went into the office and I said, Steve, if that was his name, I really don't like having that picture up. Do you think? And he was like, I'm sorry. He pulled it down and he was mortified and he was truly apologetic and he really hadn't thought it through. And I'm not saying that's a policy that can work, but
it can work a lot.
It can work a lot.
Yeah, just
if you just talk to someone and say, I wish you hadn't said that. And then I wish they had the freedom to say, well, I think you're being sensitive. Then I could say, no, not really. A lot of women would feel that way. Ask me. And then he could learn, or you could learn that you're hyper. It can be a human
right. We've stopped talking to each other.
And I think that we need very stringent laws against the the severe harassment or quid pro quo propositions from your boss, that sort of thing. Of course, we needed those laws. But what we do not need is the policing of just everyday interactions, and why can't those be handled? And if they can't be handled in a sort of informally, then I think men are increasingly going to want to stay away from us.
Oh, absolutely.
And you hear now that men don't want to mentor young women, and I get it, because they're just one or two complaints away from annihilation.
Well, what's more awkward, though, is like imagine if your colleague had, it's a small office, you're sharing it, really bad BO.
It's funny you should mention that.
but take all the politics out of it,
yes, right.
And you think, okay, that's a very awkward thing. You probably could never say anything. I don't know how I would deal with it.
change offices.
I would change offices or something. Or you could say, or you could make it political, and you could say, I have very sensitive olfactory.
But let me tell you,
chemical sensitivity. What happens to that?
This is what was so great about working in an all-boys school. Can I just tell you? And, about half the teachers were males. It was a totally male world. Men, deal with things so easily and so quickly. And if somebody had really bad BO,
they'd just say, hey, dude, get some deodorant.
I would go to another guy and say, did you notice? And he'd be like,
He'd get a nickname like Stinky.
And it would get cured. It's like men, it's like, what could be more humiliating? Like, what if you did have some guy, you have BO, for whatever reason, you have not taken care of it. Now a complaint has been filed. You have to go to this office and inevitably talk to another woman who's the HR person, and she has to talk to you. And it's just mortifying versus another guy taking him aside and saying, my husband's, one of his best friend came to Minnesota for his senior year of high school as a, English-speaking union kid. And he's a great guy, and he's English. And my husband had to say, over here we shower every day, and it was like, no problem.
We also brush our teeth.
Yes, it's no problem. It's just that everything that women want. Instead, there are good men and there are bad men. So let's make the good men the exemplars for boys, and let's tell them what the qualities and values that the good men have, and let's try to get boys leaning into that way of being a man, that kind of manhood. Instead, women got power and said, we're going to tell you what kind of man we want, and we're going to create the perfect man, and he's going to be a man who's just going to be totally subservient to, as at the office, to any inclination or feeling that we have. And a lot of men...
Not subservient, he also has to be psychic.
Exactly.
Right.
And that's the reason we're getting this, people like, where's all this, men's rights coming from? And some of it's coming from that stuff. They've had it. They have had it.
But, I don't feel like the majority of women are on board with these hypersensitive, critical, chronically aggrieved women. But somehow
young women, maybe.
The leadership, maybe even among young women, well, I think they've been misguided in their gender studies courses.
Right.
But even among the young women, I don't think they want this kind of, gender war with men, but it seems like we're stuck in it.
Can I go to Caitlin's next talking?
Yeah, well, her next, what
hang on.
What else were you?
We're going to get to Valley of the Dolls.
Okay, no, we're going to get to Valley of the Dolls at the end. We promise.
Okay.
I want that.
No, you mentioned something. I don't know if you can talk about this, but I understand you had a conference call with some highly placed Coke representatives this week.
This actually is a really good story. This
What
just happened
happened?
on Wednesday.
Well,
This
do
is
tell.
the notorious
The Koch brothers?
Koch brothers.
Yes.
They
So this
The
is
dark
a really
money?
It's dark money. It's a really
with
what?
Soros on the line.
Femsplainers is about to break a really good story because I was
Okay.
like, I should write this, and I was like, that has hassle written all over it. I'm going to tell Danielle and Christina about it on the
go.
Femsplainers.
Breaking news.
Breaking
on
news.
Hollywood
so
and Vine.
2 years ago, I get out of a clear blue this invitation from the Kochs to come to this annual event as a reporter every year, or maybe twice a year. They have this event where people who are they pay a lot of money to like be insiders in the Coke industry and find out what's really going on with the Cokes. And they stay in Palm Springs at a big resort hotel. And before they told me anything more about it, I had to click through to some preconditions, some reportorial preconditions. And I clicked through, and they were kind of, if I were that kind of reporter, like, this is pretty bullshit conditions. Like, you couldn't interview any of the people that were the members or whatever. But I was like, oh, this could be a good, interesting piece, going out to Palm Springs among the Cokes, So I'm like, sure.
This is stress. It's spelled Koch.
Yes,
Something
exactly.
like a corporation for those who are
Exactly.
not into the conspiracy world.
Right. And so I'm like, I said to my husband, hey, let's go out to Palm Springs, get a room, and I'll just go the 2 days and cover this event. And, we've all been to conferences. I'm just picturing, okay, it's at a resort hotel, and they'd said the hotel would be full, but they didn't say that they had rented the whole hotel or whatever. Well, we get there, and there's this unbelievable level of security. And my husband's kind of looking at me like, what's going on? Like, you're just checking into like a resort to go to this thing at this resort hotel. And then I'm like, this is really weird. They're checking my driver's license. They're looking under the car with the long sticks with the mirrors.
It's like going to the White House.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm like, it's like the Palm Desert Sheraton, so, or whatever it was. So then my husband pulls up to like the kind of porte cochere, the circular drive, and there's all these young Coke representatives with these big name badges on, and stepping right up is the one who had invited me, this young man. And I was kind of thinking in my mind, I was hungry and whatever. I was like, oh, before I start this, I'll go to wherever, I'll get a Coke, I'll get a this. It's like, no. He, like, very unpersonable, like friendly, but kind of nervous. He's young. And all of a sudden, he's whisked me into the elevator, and we're going up, and now we're like walking down the hotel hallway. This was like right before Me Too, but it was kind of like, and I was not worried at all about this kid like suddenly attacking me, but I'm like, this is really weird.
You'd kind of be at this stage of our lives, let's admit, we'd be flattered.
Well, I would just be, it would not be, I would have, I'm not a strong woman, but I would have.
When did this happen? Sorry.
Okay, this is the tail end of what happened. So this is all breaking news. So this is 2 years ago. A bunch of odd things that are interesting, but were really odd, start happening to me at this conference.
Sounds like The Firm, that movie with Ted
Yes,
Cruz.
it's like The Firm. And I'm like, I can't believe the other reporters are putting up with this bullshit, but they're like daily reporters, so they just need to find out, what are the Kochs backing or this or that. And I did find out everything that's happened in the Trump administration, I did find out at that conference, like, Kim Kardashian hasn't gotten these guys out of prison. The Kochs got because the Kochs are really into criminal justice reform, which was interesting to me. But after a while, I just had it with these libertarians. I'm like, and they kept everything they did. Like they're saying is like free people in a free society can do incredible things, which was kind of inspiring thought. Yes. And it was like they gave me a pencil case with it on it. But it was like, it was really weird because they wouldn't let you go anywhere without being like monitored. Like I'm talking about to the restroom, anywhere you have to be.
What were they afraid of?
Well, okay, this is all coming out. So it was like, on the one hand, I'm just inspired free people and getting people out of prison. And wow, maybe the Kochs are not this shadowy, horrible organization that they actually, in fact, are. So about midway through, I'm like, fuck this thing. So I just decide I'm out of here. So I start walking toward, it was in a back area of the hotel. And right away, my mind shows up, where are you going? And I said, I think I'll come back tomorrow. I think I've kind of understood it. He's like, okay. And so then I'm walking, and I start to feel better and better. I was like, going across the beautiful lawns of the hotel. I get inside the hotel. I get outside to the porte cochere. I hit Uber, and I'm kind of alone out there, a couple of bellmen. And then I hear behind me, yeah, I'm looking at it right now.
Oh, my God.
And I spin around, and there's this guy, a really tall, creepy guy, and he is glaring at me, and he's talking on his cell phone. And
this is like Scientology.
It's like
Scientology.
About to be sent to Sea Org.
And I and I start to take a step forward because I'm what the fuck? And then he just looks at me. The Uber has just pulled up and the bellman opens the door and he takes a step toward me and he says, "Get in." And for a minute, I'm like, is he going to jump in after me or something? But he just meant like, be gone, get out of here. So I can't even, and I'm literally kind of afraid as we're driving off property. And once we get out onto the road, and I'm even like, it was really scary. It was just really scary. So like I tell my wonderful editor, Jeff Goldberg, who's just like phenomenal guy. And he's like, it's a story. It's a story. Write it up. So I write it up, but more to the point, I email my Coke person and I'm like, I have to be honest why I'm not coming back tomorrow. And I tell him exactly what happened. And he never replies. He never replies when he'd been replying on other things. So in the heel of the hunt, I end up not publishing the story, but I keep all the paperwork or whatever. Partly because I just know what they did to Jane Mayer. And I'm like, they really were, she's a brilliant reporter and she really exposed these creeps for who they really are. And I was like, I was like, is this the hill I'm going to, killed by the Cokes? But so anyways, when the one died last week, Charles or David,
yeah.
I just retweet it and I say very clearly, I was invited to a Coke event on this date. I was followed and intimidated, and I really resent being made to feel afraid at work. And everybody's kind of interested. I go to my work email, ping, email from the Cokes. Their head of PR. I'm so sorry to hear about that. I'd love to get on the phone to dialogue or something. I'm like,
hope it wasn't HR.
It wasn't HR. It was like a PR person. So then I'm like, I'm pretty pissed off, but I'm like, well, I would be interested to hear because that was an abhorrent thing. And it was certainly, and I said something nasty, like it was a rebuke to my pencil case that says like free people in a free society. So she just keeps coming back to me like, I really would love to talk. She's like, I've learned more about the incident. When can we circle and talk? So I gave her this time on Friday. I forgot to do it. And then she came back. I gave her another time. So I call her up, or she calls me, and she's in her office, and she's with the vice president of like free speech.
So this is just recently.
2 days ago.
Oh my God.
On Wednesday.
Okay, yeah. And
I'm like, yeah, what you got? So and so the vice president of free speech, like they're super smooth. They're just both of them, but especially the vice president of free speech. She's super smooth, and she's like, yeah, Caitlin, we're really glad that you reached out to us. I'm like, I reached out to you 2 years ago. Okay, well, I'm really glad that, you brought this to our attention. And what we'd really love to do is just really dialogue with you. And the way we'd like to handle this is we'd like to have an initial off-the-record conversation. And then afterwards, we could circle back around later in the week for quotes for attribution. Would that work? And I said, no, that's not going to work. You people followed me. You people harassed me. You people didn't respond when I wrote you a letter. You're not telling me anything off the record. So you're going to have to make a choice. And they're like, and then they again try to get me to do it off the record. I'm like, no fucking way am I having this conversation off the record. What you did was really, really creepy. And so finally, vice president lady, so here's what she decides to be on the record. And here's what she tells me in a way that I'm supposed to be sympathetic to it. She's like, apparently some of these donors have had very, very serious threats of being killed at the event. And that they therefore had to hire a super security team. And I'm like, fuck you. You invite me to this place you think's going to have a mass shooting. I'm a mother of two kids.
We've hired them from Saudi Arabia.
Exactly. I was like, first place is total bullshit. And the second place, like, here I am, like, I'm not a Coke reporter. I'm like, I write about, like, lady things. Like, you're going to bring me into your lair. I'm going to get shot dead because one of these freaking libertarians has, like, burned the world down. So I'm really getting angry at them, and there's nothing to lose. So eventually I said, but I just kept circling their language back to them, which they hated. I was like, I still can't see how that's a free society. I just don't see how you could follow a woman that you've invited. She's in what appears to be, and I'm a little, I wasn't born yesterday. It's like, there's that law about public places of private accommodation. I'm like, for all I know, it's a public space. You had not told me that you had rented the entire hotel and that I would not have freedom of movement within it. You never told me that. But they had all these detailed things. So they come down to, so they obviously had lots of notes about the incident because they said you had taken off your name badge when you walked through the lobby. and no one could take their...
Come on, that was pretty ballsy of you, Caitlin. I mean, that just gives it away.
But
You are an assassin.
the creepy thing was that they pulled this note immediately.
I'm very confused. What conference was this?
So the Kochs have, if you'll look it up, every 2 years, every year, it's very well known. The Koch Foundation has a conference for people who are like, they're called scholars or something, but they're rich libertarian donors, and they get brought inside and get like a special preview to what the Kochs are doing now. In terms of getting Trump reelected, in terms of...
Right. But wait a minute, the Kochs didn't support Trump.
Oh, yes, they did.
No, they didn't. Well, they came out publicly against him.
Well, sorry, you're right. They were talking about all the money they were going to be pouring into the current midterms. That's what they were talking about.
Okay.
All the money they were going to be pouring into the current midterms. But they were so connected to Trump in all these ways. For example, their criminal justice guy, this was just in
they have worked with him on. That's true.
What's his name? The idiot Jared. They're in it, like, because Jared wants to change criminal justice because he doesn't want to end up like his father did when he was justly imprisoned for being just a real creep.
Yeah, let's reform prisons now.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, he just what did he do? He tried to beg. He tried to
have his. He set up his
brother-in-law set up with a fake.
These people. This is just poisonous. But anyways, so then I come back at them with. So she's like da 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 da. And then she's like, but she kept like getting me in all these businessy languagey circles. And she was so nice. But I was like, do not succumb to the niceness and do not succumb to any need to be nice. Because she's like, well, Caitlin, what we're hoping is you can help us to figure out how we can change in the future so this doesn't happen again. And I'm like, don't follow women, don't follow people.
Don't follow anyone.
But don't follow anyone. And, if they need security, let's suppose they have donors who get death threats. Then where the donor can have a bodyguard.
Right.
Or you have a guard at the gate, but to follow
We've
people.
all been, and as journalists and with think tanks, we have been in places like this, resorts, where there have been presidents, there have been...
The Secret Service.
But even not, with rich people. I understand, like, I think the Kochs like Soros... they probably have a lot of lunatics,
right?
Like wanting
lunatics calls out to like. I'm a lunatic. You're a lunatic. Let's go to Palm
But you know
Springs.
what I mean. I can see like the conspiratorial element. But that being said, we have been in places where proper security firms can put a perimeter on, and this is ridiculous.
But here's the other thing, Danielle. I think they were bald-faced lying when they told me that, because after it all happened, I started researching, and it turned out a journalist, had infiltrated that conference a year before and had managed to get into a room she wasn't supposed to go in and had recorded something there and and Jen had recorded herself trying to get back in and having this fight with security at the end. So I don't think that...
So they were trying to prevent that from happening again, and they
were
went
trying
overboard.
to prevent the freedom of speech of the
press.
So that's a Koch story. Pretty good one, I think.
I wish you would write it.
If I die by strange causes in the next 6 months,
you are not depressed.
Look to the libertarians.
Well, I was once at a Reason magazine conference or something, and one of the Koch brothers was there, and I didn't know who he was. And I think it was David, the one who bought, because he had just bought an apartment, and it was Jackie Kennedy's former apartment. Yeah. And then I thought, he must be rich. But at the time I didn't know. But it was casual, and I was sort of surprised. He seemed very, just friendly. And they do give a lot of money. I don't know about I'm sure there's nefarious things, but they give money to operas and in hospitals.
Well, they always say every great American fortune begins in a crime, and that's how one of the ways you launder your respectability is that you give money to colleges and to the arts or whatever.
Right.
But they're like, the world's on fire. The world is on fire this summer, and the Kochs have been very, very, very powerful in controlling American regulation around the fossil fuel industry. So they're not really
they're
our
like
friend.
the NRA is with guns. They are with fossil.
I love the opera, but I'd rather have the environment.
All right, before we come to the end,
I can't believe this is the end because this is the best
this
part.
Is the end?
Okay, you said, and I'm just going to quote you, because I have to admit, Valley of the Dolls, I'm not an expert on.
Mm-hmm.
I have my own other specialties. But
okay.
You said, and for fun, if you like, I can reveal my in-progress system for psychologically assessing women via their Valley of the Dolls score. For example, Alicia Milano is a Neely 3.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you'll have to explain that. And then you have in brackets, wildly narcissistic, but lacking the essential component of deep talent.
That was the Patty Duke character.
Yes.
and then you go on. So do you want to
Yes.
explain this?
This is what I want to say.
Okay.
I wish we had 10 hours. I'll try to just give you an introductory primer.
Yeah, for the millennials out there, they've got to know Valley of the Dolls because they
I'm
are
sad
culturally
to tell you there are boomers who don't
illiterate.
know. So, I mean, okay, so let's start with when I was young. So I was born in 1961. And there was this, so my whole youth was the 60s and the 70s. And there was this genre, it's not a genre, it was a kind of story that reappeared over and over and over. It appeared in high art and low art. It appeared in television and movies. And I just loved it. And the story was, you know, a young white woman who probably is college educated comes to New York. And it's the city. And she's going to make it there. And she's going to have this exciting life. And then in the course of the story, except for the sitcoms that used it, because they were always happy, she would be inevitably coarsened by the city. And she would inevitably learn the dark truths. And then, so like the high art, you know, classic would be like the best essay of the last half century, which is Joan Didion's Goodbye to All That, which is, you know, Joan leaving the West, winning the Prix de Paris at Vogue, which, you know, Sylvia Plath had won that, other people, you know, coming just to do that, ending up staying 8 years and having this affair with this married man who doesn't leave his wife. And it's just, I mean, I must have read that essay a million times. And then on the other end, and then in television, that is what That Girl's about. You remember, like, Marlo Thomas. Yeah. And then even, you know...
Or Mary Tyler Moore.
Yeah, well, that was set in Minneapolis, but originally it was supposed to be set in New York. Yeah. The high art example is, of course, Goodbye to All That. And then the low art is this trash fantastico of Valley of the Dolls by Jacqueline Suzanne. And it was this massive bestseller. And a lot of people have seen the movie, which is a significant cultural document because Sharon Tate is in it.
And one of the worst movies of all time.
It's one of the worst movies.
But the campiest movie.
Yes.
Because it's so bad, it's genius.
It's genius. And Sharon Tate's après swimming outfit is, you know, it's for the gods. But the idea is that in Valley of the Dolls, what makes it so fantastic, the book, it's not the movie. The book is like this sprawling Victorian novel. There's all these characters. It's incident crammed. But you have these three main characters that at the time, even as a kid, and I've read that a zillion times, I was old enough to get these. They're like, this is a trash novel, a great trash novel. But they were these three women that were these particular, I don't want to say archetypes, but are qualities of womanhood that have seemed to be enduring. You had Neely, she's the young singer who's like incredibly talented and bound to be a star, but she's a hideous narcissist and a drama queen and needs all the attention. Then you have Jennifer, that's Sharon Tate. She's the girl with this incredible body. She's super nice. She can get rich men to love her, but she's too nice to just want that. But she's kind of doomed because she's always up against the clock of aging because all she has is her body.
Her beauty, yeah.
Her beauty, that's all she has as a commodity. And then you have Anne, whom you're all supposed to want to be. And Anne's like the Mary Tyler Moore. She's this there's always a wasp in these things. And she's like this waspy girl from New England, very beautiful, very poised. She comes to New York to be, in those days, like women would go to Katie Gibbs' secretarial school. Even really well-born girls, they would go to Katie Gibbs and they would become secretaries, they would get married. And so she becomes a secretary and she becomes just a heartbroken person because she falls in love with this guy who has a lot of affairs. And so she becomes coarsened through that. And the novel is 20-year novel from 1945. I mean, it's like Trollope. It's like from 1945.
Or the first Sex in the City, it sounds like.
Yes.
Are you a Samantha?
Yes.
And it came out before, because it was so successful, suddenly clever entrepreneurs realized, oh, Americans really are interested in gossip. And then suddenly you got People magazine, all that came later. But this was just sort of the dark side.
But also, to me, just the idea of young women that didn't, like nowadays, all these young women, and God love them, but they would be like, I know exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to major in organic chemistry. I'm going to like get an internship at the National Foundation of Science. Like, they're power seeking and kind of just boring to me because I'm not interested in those things. But in that era, these young, again, white, privileged, middle class women, they're kind of inventing these lives and on their own terms, but also very much on the terms that are not their own. So anyways, I realized that Alyssa Milano In fact, I've upgraded her after a long night of study. So I didn't realize we were going to spend so much time on a serious topic. I thought this was going to be
I know, we were so serious.
I know. I thought we were going to really Valley of the Dolls it up. But this is just a foretaste of future Valley of the Dolls content. She is a major figure of our times, Alyssa Milano.
Yeah.
Because she is the most fully realized example of a type that we all know very well and that everyone listening to this podcast knows. It's the white, middle-aged woman with a lot of time on her hands and for whom the Trump presidency has erupted in this explosion of purpose, which totally dwindles down to like just the constant circulation of articles and opinions and, you know, fatwas. And you go and she has like 3.5 million followers. And so she will just like, I just was looking, in fact, I even...
Is this a form of toxic femininity?
No, I'm not sure what exactly it is. It's very industrious. It's very...
You mean the hating Trump?
Well, it's just that she's just constantly...
It's giving you a cause.
But it's given this cause, but there's a lot of emotional instability that goes with it. So, like, over 3 days, she tweeted 3 different, like, horrible pictures of... child separations in the border in July. And in the first one, like very, you know, in properly stated English, very gentle, she said, please don't look away from this. I know it's hard to look at, but we need to look. We need to know what's going on. So I offer this to you. Next day, a mere 24 hours, another story like that, but now in all caps, don't you fucking look away. And I'm like, who's this Twitter feed? Like, who's it addressed to? Like, I thought she was my nice leader towards, you know,
I didn't look away the first time.
It's like, I didn't. And then she's going back and forth for 4 days. Don't you fucking look away. Let's look. And then these women, they really want to have one thing that is the most important problem in America right now, that we're just going to focus on that, but they can't locate it. So it'll be like 8 hardcore weeks on global warming, let everything else go to hell because we're just burning up. And then all of a sudden they just totally they clunk out on that. And then you're like, well, what about the global warming content? It's child separation at the border. That's what it's all about. It's nothing but that, child separation. And I agree with them on all these issues. Like, I'm a progressive, I have the same issues, but they are just coming at it. But then in the middle of all that, and so Alyssa Milano, like all these women, but the highest form of these women, she has this vision of America that it is like a lawless, failed state. Like,
right.
It's basically,
She started the sex strike. We were supposed to be like Lissy Strata because all the men are beating us and attacking us in the society.
She's had everything. So, like, you go through, she's just like, she's got a full hand. She's got the postpartum depression, you name it, she's had it. But so what they don't realize, these women, this is the best part of the podcast. You should put this first. What these women don't realize is they all think they have these original fucking sets of opinions. And then we're able to listen and we're like, yeah, you watched on MSNBC last night. But what they really have is that what runs the news everywhere, what runs CNN, what runs MSNBC, what runs to the extent there's local newspapers, it's the New York Times. You know, my brother-in-law taught me this. It's the front page budget of the New York Times. Everybody in every news office in the country waits to see for the New York Times to come through. They look what's above the fold. That's the story. And that's why it's not that everybody thinks that the most important national story is child separation. It's that it's the most important story to the New York Times, and that's the paper of record. And that's why people who hate the New York Times have a right to hate it, in that it has this huge cultural oppressive influence everywhere. And so these women are just responding to the long trail. And even when you see
it's sort of like the Fox News of the
progressive
except
of the upper middle class.
Except everywhere. And so and then if ever you see like a Rachel Maddow or Lawrence O'Donnell, if they start their show with like, you know, everybody says X is the big topic right now. I have a hunch it's Y, and we're going to explore. Well, Y is always fucking below the fold on the New York Times. That's as far as they went for an outrageous story. So anyways.
Okay, so that makes her a Neely?
No, wait. She's getting
to the point. But the other thing you need to know about why Alyssa Milano is the most important woman of our times. Within all this, so we're simultaneous a failed lawless state with these horrible problems. And then you'll get like funny memes. Like, your last emoji is the face you make during sex. Or then she'll get like heartwarming stories of like, oh, look at these two kids at the park. They're holding hands. That's just like my daughter. So it's like, it sounds like she's having some fun, you know? And so what she is she's a high Neely, which is she's a narcissist. That's the first thing.
Yeah.
So she's a very high Neely. She's facing the Jennifer dilemma. She was an actress.
Jennifer's the beauty.
The beauty. Yeah. And now Alyssa Milano's 45. It's hard to get parts when you're 45. So she's up against that. And then the Anne, but she's a zero Anne, I think I said.
Yes.
Because Anne, my role in life has always been to be more of an Anne. Because Anne is very controlled. And she's too controlled. She's so controlled that she lets herself be walked all over.
She would be Charlotte in Sex and the City.
Okay, I don't really know Sex and the City, but...
Those who watch it will understand.
Okay. So she's just too controlled. So I'm always trying to be more controlled. But I think this is my developing theory that I'm just introducing now, that I will have more content of all forms in the future, is that if you take Neely, Jennifer, and Anne, and you really know their components, you can really figure out what's making a woman tick. I think Jackie Suzanne was a very smart social psychologist.
I don't want to hear what you think Christina and I are.
Oh, the Barbara Parkinson. No, but I don't know which one.
I think there are so many.
Well, I'm looking at Danielle and I'm getting a high Anne quotient, which is good. Like very together, very like holding your temper well. That's what I mean. That's what I'm getting.
Not according to my Uber rating.
No, you don't know. She doesn't know the dark side. And what about me? The Sharon Tate character.
You're Jennifer.
No.
Well, you both have a lot of Jennifer, but I think you're that person who is like, like Neely, you've known your talent. I mean, you're an academic, you're a PhD. You're not just like, Danielle and I, we got to hand it to ourselves. We got a good hustle going on. Like, we're just like, we're making something from nothing in our careers, right? Whereas you're like the PhD, you know, but you don't have any of the narcissism. So you're under control. So you've got a good balance. You had a good balance there, Christina.
Maybe it's the Libra.
Next time, I'm going to reveal my way of categorizing women.
Okay.
Is which Disney princess do you identify with? And that tells you, when you were little, and that tells you a lot about who you are. I have a whole, I found somebody has actually written a book on this. I thought this was my own private theory, and someone's written a book, and I sort of thought maybe we should have her on the Femsplainers. But
it might be my wonderful niece Faith Moore, who's written a book about the Disney princesses.
Maybe
she would
Is she your niece?
She's my niece. She's my little baby girl.
Okay, well then
she would be a phenomenal guest.
Okay, well then when it's done. But did you have a favorite Disney princess?
You know,
there were
I have
fewer
to say,
when we were growing up.
I was always into from a very little girl. I was looking up at those beautiful young women so I wasn't really.
You didn't have a favorite? Snow White, Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty? No?
I didn't even really like them very much. Oh, is that terrible to say?
No, it's fine.
I loved the Barbie doll. I loved anything sexy and beautiful. In second grade, my parents were called in because we had to write an essay, and mine was about what we grew up. I had a one-sentence essay. I always flaked off at work. But when I grow up, I want to be a sex symbol like Raquel Welch. Because I just always on TV, sex symbol just seemed like a fun, nice
Jennifer.
lady.
That was your Jennifer.
Yeah, that was my aspirational, non-existent
Did you ever
Jennifer.
have a favorite Disney princess, Christina?
I liked Cinderella's stepsisters.
Oh, very good.
I just thought they were sort of like Goneril and Regan.
But you didn't.
Yeah,
I did not
Goneril and Regan. That's who they are.
Shakespeare stole the story from the. No, I just thought they were. I liked I just loved the villainesses. They were more interesting, or like what was it, Cruella de Vil?
Oh yeah,
all that. I just found them funny.
There's a new movie coming out that's just going to be Cruella.
They're going to tell the story from the point of view of Cruella.
Good, right?
And she was misunderstood. I bet it's going to be like a version of Wicked. I don't know how they're going to
get around the idea that she's killing the dog.
Dalmatians.
I'm sure they've got something about that. I'm sure they're going to say it's actually stuffed animals or something, because kids don't want to see that. But she was so sexy,
and then Snow White's stepmother.
Yeah.
Mirror, mirror.
Talk about a Jennifer.
Yeah.
Yes, but the cruelty of a Neely.
Yeah, there you go.
But she's also got, like, there's other two characters, we don't have to bring them in, but Helen Lawson, who's the aging, talented Broadway star who's very vindictive. There's a little bit of that with the stepmother.
All right, well, let's end it there because we are in Hollywood.
Liza Minnelli her mother,
right,
was supposed to have played that part. Judy Garland was supposed to have been
Yes.
that part, and
Yes.
she was just falling apart on the stage like
Yeah.
one of the characters.
Right.
they got-
That's all those broken, failed women like Marilyn Monroe. Here we are on Hollywood Boulevard. I just am obsessed by that.
Well, after this, we didn't have cocktails here because we're actually recording this
Are we gonna have them at
uncharacteristically in the
lunch?
morning.
Of
I
course.
think
Oh,
so. I
good.
think we should go to Schwab's. What do you say?
It's no longer there.
I know, I'm joking.
We've already been discovered. We've already been canceled.
we could have been discovered.
Oh,
This would have been
really?
our moment. But thank you.
I got recognized in a really horrible place, but I was like, wow, this is micro celebrity at its best because, like, I've been recognized sitting in a doctor's office weeping. It was just like
That's when you don't want to be
I know.
recognized.
It's like, are you Caitlin Flanagan? It's like, yes, at last it can be
no,
revealed.
actually, no.
Exactly. That's
I
what I
don't
should have
know.
said.
I don't even know who
Who's
that is.
I was once recognized in a Saskatoon airport in Saskatchewan.
You're big in
Wow.
Canada.
Well,
Yeah,
you're
big in
you're just a
Saskatoon.
celebrity.
I was
You are
big
just
in
a celebrity.
Canada.
You're not there's no
Saskatoon.
micro.
All right, ladies, we're going to continue this over lunch.
Good.
Thank you, Caitlin.
Could there be future femsplainers where there really is more of a cocktail component?
We
We
didn't have
always do.
Oh, okay.
We always do. And in fact, I had pre-made cocktails in my hotel room, but I just didn't think. Yeah, it was my failure.
Okay.
I'm sorry, everybody. So thank you, Caitlin, for being with us. Thank you, Danny of Excellent Studios, and yeah, let's go have some fun. Hey, thanks for listening to the Femsplainers. Keep up with us on Twitter and Facebook at Femsplainers and on Instagram at Femsplainers Podcast. Send questions and comments to contact@femsplainers.com.
A big thanks to Ella Ryder, our research and in-studio production assistant, and to Nat Frum, our audio and video editor. And we're proud to be part of the Ricochet Network and grateful to the American Enterprise Institute for allowing us to record in its studio every week in downtown Washington, D.C.
And miss something? You'll find everything you need at our homepage, femsplainers.com, including links to past episodes, our sponsors, where you can sign up to support us, and even to merch. And please don't forget to like us or give us 5 stars on iTunes.
Thank you. Cheers.
Cheers.